So we'll start by taking a few questions.
I'm trying to find where it was in my notes. I think you had talked about one of the proofs that something was a valid cognition is that it has that sorry, I'm trying to find it. Sorry. Oh, so okay, how to prove the initial cognition is non-deceptive, and you said that there was the argument that there is the awareness of the recognition. That was one way. And then we are also able to use our ordinary experience, our ordinary conventional experience. And I had a question because I think you had said earlier that the Prasadika school did not hold to this idea of the self-awareness aspect.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering if that would just be addressed later, or if that then is not a form of how to prove that something is a valid condition.
Somebody looking at the thing go at the Rari can marry down, and he go at the topic, and some of the air he sort the Rari manner, and kind of the Teshava, Ima so good we are as he not
the many need to be shared need to be shared from this place. To me, younger Shabbat, Jedum Kinigasu, to me, India is. To me, the train to me to be shared India. We just you get you never initiated the using it initiative. That's what that is going on.
So an example for the Pramanavarttika school of how one verifies that the correct cognition that you have attained is in fact a correct cognition. Then one example would be to for the meditator to perceive emptiness directly during a state of one-pointed meditation, and at the time that the emptiness is being cognized in that meditative state, the practitioner doesn't have any reflective quality which is saying, "Oh, I'm realizing emptiness," or anything to that effect. However, when the practitioner arises from that state of meditative equipoise or meditative state, then once by the power of that, having attained that experience, then one recalls that one during that state of meditation, practitioner himself or herself did perceive emptiness directly, and that recollection is the method by which one ascertains that the correct cognition was generated.
There's a good initiative to move to the
So it's not the case that when you perceive emptiness directly, that realization itself is not responsible for, or is not the aspect of your mind that leads to the recollection that you've attained that correct cognition. But that realization itself, then Jampa means it is able to adduce, right, to bring about a kind of recollection, which is then, able to, more, shall I say, dualistic way or reflective way, then recognize that previous cognition was a form of correct cognition, direct realization. So the correct cognition itself, by the power of that awareness, then it has the ability to bring forth in its wake the recollection that ascertains that it was a correct cognition. The same way, by the same token, for the Pramanavarttikka's sense perception, when you perceive something that's blue, then the Pramanavarttikkas do not maintain that there has to be that that hypothetical entity of self-awareness of the perception in order to be able to generate the recollection that you have the perception of blue. So the Pramanavarttikka, the perception of blue itself, by having been experienced, then has an effect on you such that after you gain that perception, you're able to recall that it was experienced. And so it's the actual sensory perception itself that again is able to, has the efficacy or the power to be able to create this recollection or lead to this recollection that recognizes that the sense perception was experienced.
That is that Raji Siachi center when around the million times when I'm we give a million times the same to number million we give a million meet the teaching in music. Million dear to get million dear to get million to any give million thousands hundred. But being little about we care, but you did in my bump and you tell it. You did in my bump and you tell it us.
You said Mapamba?
No good to location, not a month to me at the speed.
Okay.
And then
The Lagi or Mexico. So do it different.
No good to me at the lawyer to keep no good Chamberlain. You keep on your night. You did the you were Jason. You keep on the YouTuber and the night. No good to me at the theater. You change that. No good to me. You go Louisiana. Cutting. No good getting the shit and the students. And then we should be that. It just number 2 you pay. Issue. Somebody somebody need bunny, no thing that you need bunny. I no thing that you must no two young you keep bunny alive. You got into
So one of the key elements of the Prasangika explanation is it centers around the fact that a perception has two components to it. It has the object that's being perceived, and then there is the subjective mental aspect that is perceiving that object. So the problem for other schools is how is there a recollection of the subjective quality that perceives the object, unless there's something else that experiences it, and so hence presumably the need for that self-awareness. The Prasangika say that when you have a perception, whether it's a perception of blue or Rinpoche gave another example, he said in a dream, for instance, if you dream that you gave birth to a child, for instance, and then you wake up afterwards and you remember the dream. You remember not only the content of the dream, but the fact that you had the dream, and the dream was obviously a mental state. And so it's saying that the recollection of the prior experience does not lose sight of the subjective element. So it's not like when you perceive blue, for instance, and you have a recollection, you don't only recollect the fact that you perceive the object blue. Part of that recollection involves the fact that there was a subjective perception of the blue. And it's just the nature of experience and the nature of the way mind operates. So it's saying no need to postulate this kind of self-awareness. So the phrase that what you used, which a little bit confused me, was that when you recall the prior experience, you don't, the sense of the subjective quality of it has not been abandoned. Yuchen Mapanga means the fact that you subjectively had the experience of the blue, that subjective quality is not sort of somehow lost in in the wake of it, when you recall it, that its force still is carried over, and when you recall the prior experience, the aspect of the perceiving or the perceptive mind is also a part of the recollection. So that's how you can determine a prior experience from the point of view of the mental aspect of it. So, first point that's being discussed is in relation to first line in verse 34, which says the proof, meaning the proof of the Buddha's spiritual authority, is
디나는 누가 담보 담보 찾아 두면에 두어야지 있는지 깨네. 이 지수 국내시의 탑 공부를 제발해 점을 그렇게 제일
좀 되겠어요.
예.
So then it says the proof is that is because the Buddha is a spiritual authority because he cultivated compassion. So the two words are compassion and cultivate, and they're in the ablative cases because, so that's showing it's a reason. So he's a spiritual authority because he cultivated compassion. So the commentary looks at those two words, compassion and cultivate, and expand on the implication of those two words by saying, start by saying, great compassion is the proof, is a proof that understood, the Buddha is understood, is the authoritative spiritual being. And it says, in order to prove that, first, in order to become that authoritative spiritual being, compassion must be a precursor. Mundu Songbook, it must have been developed prior to becoming that spiritual being, ultimate spiritual being. And it says, and then it says, initially, in order to gain that great compassion, so then it's great compassion is a specific form of compassion. It's not just any compassion. So then you have to develop the quality, the generic quality of compassion, in which you develop the desire to liberate all beings from their suffering. And then after that has been generated, after that compassion has been generated, then you have in your mind great compassion, which is preceded by cultivating the generic form of compassion, loving kindness, which are characterized by the desire to provide others with happiness and the desire to free them from suffering. Those are their essential qualities. So if you have that impulse to accomplish that, then when you've generated that great compassion, then that urges you or prompts you to consider what is the method by which you can bring about that result, that desire to provide people with happiness and free them from suffering. And as you do that, then what's not explicitly indicated by those words is that you have to consider, well, what is the best means by which to accomplish that? What's the highest means? What's the supreme means? And you can determine that it is Buddhahood itself. And Buddhahood is the supreme means for accomplishing that goal, because the Buddha has the unique ability to carry out the activities that will bring that about in a spontaneous way, in an effortless way, in a way that no other being has that similar ability. And so with that understanding, then one sets out to seek that ultimate state. And then it says, as this text, as this treatise presents it, the main method is by cultivating the wisdom, which, so here it's saying that cultivating. So cultivating doesn't only apply to cultivating great compassion, it also applies to cultivating the second main quality, which is the actual knowledge, wisdom, that will terminate one's own suffering and also enable one to be able to teach others how to do it for themselves. So that ultimate state of being able to free beings from suffering derives from the initial generation of great compassion, which is dedicated to others, and then that is a kind of necessary prerequisite or first pause in order to embark on a process that will culminate with your attainment of the enlightenment, which will endow you with the quality of being that spiritual authority. So that term, the proof is that it's because the first proof is that that spiritual authority is attained by cultivating compassion, includes all of those elements.
다 산지 그만 토바를 가리고 있는 탑시 있는 것도 그런가
그렇죠.
탑 인지 좀 그렇죠. 실은 어떤 것 조합해서 어떤 것 담이 또 있어요.
그렇죠.
탑시 있는 공간을 되니 어떤 것 충분히가 그렇죠. 탑시 있는 공간을 되니 어떤 것 충분하다. 탑시 있는 것도 그런가
그렇죠.
이까지 tempat kami tu besar mana kami jitu tu dia tadi inji sinde kami tu besar kami jitu sinde kami tu besar tempat siapa berarti jika nanti
No.
kami jitu
So another way of describing it is that in order to become a Buddha, or the term is Jampa, the master or teacher in the sense of an enlightened teacher, one has to cultivate both means and wisdom. And so means, it can be interpreted specifically as referring to great compassion. And then in combination with that, one has to also cultivate the wisdom. In this text, wisdom is generally described as the wisdom that perceives or realizes selflessness. Selflessness can be interpreted in a number of ways. So those two qualities, also the means and the wisdom must be cultivated in a particular sequence. In other words, you have to first cultivate compassion, and then develop the wisdom, and then through that process, you can eventually become enlightened.
That dengan tempat ini, ini jadi tempat kerja kami semua jadi suatu senjata kami semua suatu. Di ini senjata tempat mereka, ada tu terlupa macam ini ini kalau sudah jadi suatu senjata sanji kuat macam seperti senjata tempat ini jadi kami semua suatu. Suatu ini sangat berbahaya. Di situ ini jadi kami suatu membuat hal cuma ini sudah berbahaya. Di situ ini dia jawab cuma jawab cuma tujuh jawab cuma membuat ini jawab jawab macam ini jadi ini tapi jawab ini.
So, having made this assertion, then there is immediately following that, then Dharmakirti introduces an opposing view, mainly the view of the materialist. So the essential doctrine, Buddhist doctrine, is that in order to become enlightened, after you develop the aspiration to save all sentient beings, then the individual must practice, engage in spiritual practice for, in the Sutrayana system, then 3 separate periods of time, each one is made up by what is called a countless number of kalpas. Countless being figurative meaning called kalpas. So then countless kalpas implies a countless lifetimes over which one must accumulate the virtue and merit and wisdom that will allow you to achieve that ultimate goal. So then the first objection is that there's no such thing as cultivating compassion and or wisdom over countless lifetimes, because there's no such thing as past lives and future lives. So in other words, one has to establish that one can practice over multiple lifetimes in order to eventually achieve supreme enlightenment. So that's an essential element of the argument, that one becomes a spiritual authority by cultivating compassion and all the other elements of the path.
다들 자리가 너네 유네 때문에 제 공부가 되지는 않습니다. 어때? 너네 유네가 때문에 있어요. 다들 그 너네 유네 때문에 되지 내가 숨쉬어요.
So the root text then immediately following that first line, verse 34, says, because this is not a materialist objection or criticism, saying that the nature of the mind is that it is based upon, it is an attribute of the body, and therefore the thesis that one is able to engage in this repetitive spiritual practice over many lifetimes is unproven. It's not valid to make that claim, because if there aren't many lifetimes, there's one lifetime. You get one body, there's a mind with it, and when your body disappears, then or when your life ends, then the mind is annihilated or vanishes.
다들 그 장배래 경나 지켜는 장배 것이 다들이 경나 지켜를 붙이들 그거들이 창단 뇌에 누가 다르스 이를 일기인데 창단 창기 뇌에 누가니 붙이 창나기 뇌도 라시아 누가 디아르바 어디니 나시 이 로디 유니티 내리죠. 그러네 지바단 지베리 무타르 리지 나시 지바디 지베데 리무티 지스페시나 지는 신부가 제산티 리지 나시 스캔 그래서 이제 얘네 마음에 다 이래다 리지 되고 있어. 그 마음에 이래다 마음에 뜻이는 마음에 그래서 그래서 제산의 비리식도 그냥 선비식도 되죠. 그래서 이제 때에 숨지.
So this objection, or this objection, is an opportunity to refute the Buddhist, or not the Indian materialist school, which existed at that time, and objected, did not believe in past and future lives. And so this is an opportunity for the Buddhists to argue against that position. So the Tibetan, the name for this school is called Jampa, and that is translating the word Lokayata. Lokayata is not probably the most familiar term for the materialists. They're known as Charakas, but those are two names for the same school. So and in their literature, which there are elements of their positions that are found in Buddhist literature and other Indian literature as well. They include three classic similes that the materialists use to describe the relationship between the body and the mind as being one that such that the mind is not some kind of separate substance from the physical body, but rather the mind is a quality or an attribute of the body. So it means there's not a separate mental substance. So the three similes are that the relationship between body and mind is like the relationship between some chang means some kind of intoxicating liquid, like beer, wine, or any kind of alcohol beverage, alcohol beverage, and then the capacity for that alcohol to intoxicate. The fact that one can become intoxicated by drinking that alcohol is the element that corresponds to the mind. So both the quality that it can induce intoxication is innate to the alcoholic beverage. So the body of a so-called living being has the same capacity to generate thoughts. And that's the first thing. The second one is like the relationship between a wall and drawings on a wall, for instance, wall paintings, fresco. So the paintings on the wall are an attribute of the wall. They're dependent upon the wall. If the wall is destroyed, then the painting will also disappear. So similarly, if the body comes to an end, is no longer a living organism, then the mind will also cease to exist. And the third simile is that between a lamp, which is an object, and the fact that the lamp is able to, if it's lit, if it's a wick, or if it turn on the electricity, it has the ability to generate light. So the light that's generated from a lamp is corresponds to, is analogous to the mind, just as the light is an attribute of the lamp, the mind is an attribute of the body. So understanding that main thesis of the materialist school, the significance of it spiritually is that if their thesis is true, if the mind is only an attribute of the body, and that when this life ends, when the body becomes not able to continue to function, then the mind also then ceases to exist, then there can't be any past and future lives. So if there are no past and future lives, then if we take the Lamrim, for instance, the Lamrim has three then sort of gradations of practice. The practice for the lesser practitioner or the basic practitioner is that he or she is frightened by the prospect of being reborn in the future life in one of the lower realms. That form of suffering, the existence, or the potential existence of that suffering should inspire fear and apprehension. And in order to avoid that consequence, then one engages in the method of spiritual practice, two main practices of taking refuge in the three jewels and cultivating a lifestyle that conforms to the principles of karma. So if there is no future life, future rebirth potentially in the lower realms, then there's no need to fear that suffering, so we have no reason to engage in the practices that make up that aspect of the Lamrim caste system. So then then the materialist point of view refutes. Specifically, we gave example of the lower or the basic level of the Lama system, but same thing would apply in an appropriate way to the middling level practitioner, as in also same by the same token for the Mahayana aspect of the Lama.
That didn't give the lam kadang kares ne give the lam kon Nijuku Sambake, Nijuku Sambake quite cheap in a samba. Then Nia Samba, Nia Samba, Nia Samba Tierra, also but cheap to it. This has some means Yaganachi to Nishi and Yajo to net to some means the timber, really Yane and the Torata. Yane and Nitam Java as Yati. Some year, but this is young Nachi you Yane and the Torati, Yamari, Yane and Nitam Chavati, Yamarba. Yes, and your Kwachi to Samyati, Kar. You can Kwachi to Masan, Niju Samba, Kwachi to Nisam, in it, for a time to lose give. For a time to lose give a Kwachi to Nisam.
So in the case of the middling level practitioner is the individual who has developed so-called renunciation. Renunciation meaning the aspiration to achieve liberation from all of samsaric existence. In order to develop that's the starting point for that level of the path. In order to develop that attitude, it's necessary for the practitioner to reflect on the general suffering of samsara, not the specific suffering of the lower realm, not limited to the specific suffering of the lower realm, but to all the suffering in samsara as a whole. And so there are various presentations. 8 kinds of suffering is one set of meditations, 6 kinds of suffering is another set of meditations, 3 kinds of suffering, which are meant to cover all of samsaric existence. So, for instance, among the second set of 6 types of suffering, one meditation is to reflect on the fact of how many rebirths how many lives one has had to abandon, on how many years, if you piled up all the bodies that you discarded in past samsaric existence, it would be an immense mountain. It's meant to inspire a sense of weariness about samsara. Similarly, one can reflect how many times one was reborn in samsara. And then, from the beginning end of samsara, then how much milk, mother's milk, have you drunk over the infinite past? Again, same kind of sense of fatigue and dissatisfaction with the perpetual nature of samsaric existence. So if you don't reflect on suffering in that manner, you can't develop a kind of sense of dread and disaffection with samsaric existence that will prompt you to develop renunciation and pursue the path to liberation. So the materialist view, if it were true, would then make that whole prospect invalid, irrelevant, untrue.
That didn't give much in the long Kali, the Karas and the Nichikawa, Makambara, and Sanji to part to get card. It didn't give much in the long card.
By the same token, if we're talking about the Mahayana path, then the first point that was made here is that you must cultivate great compassion as the starting point of the path. That compassion be one that generates concern for the suffering condition of others and wants to alleviate them. So, in order to do that, then one dedicates oneself to the path to supreme enlightenment over many lifetimes. So, in that path, it's refuted. The possibility of that is refuted if there are not paths to future lives.
That Malaysia the Kuran Matona Nas Yerba and Tadaliana Cherry to Cherry to Kuran the Tunia to issue to the Shem John so much in his head. That is the Cherry the Tente Yamari to go to where but Cherry the Tente Yamari could do Tangi Chigerba. Justo Tampuchi Kelly, Taya, Tadi, Yachi, Yachi Pato, Mamat with the Yachi Kelly there. That is a Chita, and the Jampa Chipari, John Kelly, around the Matuna, yes, here. So, I was just saying, Grand Matuna, yes, Jampa Chipari. That, there's a go to here, but here.
So the materialist view, even though the one that's being referred to by Dharmakirti refers to a historical tradition of classical India, and the case can be made that materialism is very prevalent in modern science, and maybe not for everybody, but it is it generally espoused to by many elements of the whole scientific community. So there's a principle in Buddhism, or a phrase that's used that often is mentioned as a sort of way of referring to the materialist figure, saying, you say that something doesn't exist, but really the basis for saying it is that you don't have any ability to see something. So if you don't see it, then it doesn't exist. If you can't see it, or if you can't find some proof for it to exist, then you reject it. And so then there's a corollary of this. Just because you don't see something, that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And the Buddhist sort of sort of in a general way, it's not an argument, but it's a sort of a description of kind of a flaw in the materialist position. And so if we take the case of science, for instance, science is always looking for what's the scientific method is to find to do some kind of experiment that will be able to prove some thesis, right? It's not accepted to be true unless you can find some experiment that will validate the hypothesis. That's kind of, I think, a fair representation of the scientific method. So then Rinpoche commented, well, the fact of the matter is that science, modern science in particular, is a whole body of knowledge that is not fixed. It is constantly revising itself. It evolves. Science will, be, what is it, the Newtonian, physics will be the word of the land for a certain time until some other system comes along that doesn't completely invalidate it, but replaces it in a certain way. So that's kind of indicative of modern science. And so what you meant that modern science is not likely to accept the doctrine of dependent origination in the sense of it that it refers to the process of life, samsara, how it explains the process of samsaric existence and the possibility of bringing samsaric existence to an end. Science doesn't really, modern science, Western science, doesn't really have a model that understands that as it's meant in Buddhism, and so therefore is not likely to give it much credence.
이지체니
그렇죠.
아니 저한테는 최고예요.
그렇죠.
어떤 주중기 시험을 했기 때문에 나랑도 다 저항의 지역을 주중기 시험을 했기 때문에 이제 아니 아주 저를 중요하다. 기본이야. 어디에서는 이게 충분히 그렇다. 주중기 시험을 했기 때문에 저를 주고 거를 지키기야. 이거 봐야 거를 지키기야. 어디 매네 이직이 대가를 지으나 상계 중시하고 이직이 대가 전이야. 지금 아니 저를 좀 같아. 이거 봐야 준비하다. 어디에서는 지중 시를 같이 제가 있는 나랑 단답히 지금 기지야 되가 아니 상계 무슨 이직에 정의 지켜는 지켜야 해서 나 지금 시를 지금 와를 지켜는 폐지 예설이 여기가 지금 지금 시를 지키기야 상중시를 군중시를 상중시를 이제 생활을 지키게 주중은 나는 지키겠다 주중시를 지키는데 나 뒤에 편도시를 열어봐.
So then, kind of from the point of view of a practitioner, how we can approach this topic as beginning practitioners in particular is that for the most part, we do not have the valid cognition. In this case, it would be an inference, a valid inference. We've not generated in our own minds a valid inference in which we can or have proven to ourselves that there are past lives and future lives. So for most of us, we rely on faith, on the instruction that we hear from spiritual teachers that is based upon the teachings of the Buddha, and we develop what is called the wisdom that is born of listening. Tujungi Shira. Tujungi Shira means, Tujungi Shira is epistemologically rises only to the level of correct belief. It's not a form of knowledge. Even if you've studied all the material and you know all the arguments by heart, if you have not processed those arguments in your own mind and verified their truthfulness, then you've not developed actual inference about, in the case of the proof of past and future lives, that awareness that is possible, but for most of us, we have not had the opportunity to do that. So at most, we can say that our knowledge is based on learning the doctrine by hearing it from teachers and reading, the valid text and so on, that talk about it, practice, and then on the basis of that, we develop a kind of faith, and that faith prompts us to accept. So we say, well, I don't know that there are past lives and future lives. I believe that there are. I'm confident that the claims that are represented in Buddhist literature are true, and so I'm willing to accept that and develop a spiritual practice in which I try to avoid engaging in non-virtuous behavior, and I try to cultivate virtuous behavior in order to ensure that my future lives will be favorable. So that's kind of the way most of us proceed, or have proceeded, and it's not to be rejected as dismissed as sort of not meaningful. It is meaningful. However, only when our when our reflection, when our study, when our reasoning powers are brought to bear on the doctrine, and that we develop our understanding of doctrine to the level of what is called wisdom that is born of reflection. Wisdom that is born of reflection, by definition, represents a form of knowledge, form of inferential knowledge, whether it be past and future lives, whether it be emptiness, whether it be subtle impermanence. We can develop true inference. But that inference means in our mind. That inference means that we've verified it and developed certainty in our own minds that rises to the level of a true inferential understanding. And then, we're at a different level.
that 경험치 얘기. 이게 그 준비들은 뭐지? 중요한 거. 어때? 진짜는 어때 무슨 데 지가 알았어. 무슨 예, 알았어. 예, 알았어. 경험치. 이거에 야르가 뭐가 야리.
알았어. So there are various methods for recognizing and developing an awareness of the existence of past life. So we have accounts of people who, by almost some unusual quality, they're able to remember their past lives. Children will sometimes refer to where they had lived in the life before this one. And so those instances, to the extent that they can be verified, those would be referred to as a kind of almost like that direct perception. And by the same token, one can recall one's past lives on the strength of one-pointed concentration. But short of those methods, then the only other recourse we have is our own reason. And our own reasoning can, in fact, inform us that there must be past lives. That it must be in the sense of not just a belief, but a form of certainty that there had to have been a past life in order for me to exist in this present life.
뭐라 좋아해? 어제 그거 나한테
아니, 금방이가
영화는 무슨
영화 스스로.
영화 세트다 저랑 같이
So generally in the literature, it looks that there are 5 different kind of proofs or 5 different explanations that are meant to establish the existence of past lives. You mentioned 3 of them. So one is called the prior existence of the material cause. Prior existence of the material cause is the idea that a mental entity is a kind of object, a kind of existent thing that is unique. That is mental, and mental is the opposite of the material position. That the mind is something separate from something physical. And so whatever moment of mental existence there is, whatever moment of awareness there is, that moment of awareness must have been preceded by a prior moment of awareness. It has to be a continuum. And it also implies the notion that mind is a causally produced entity. Then the argument, one way of describing the argument is that a child that's just been born, right, born in the Western sense of the word, meaning that's issued from the mother's womb, that child has an awareness, and that awareness had to be preceded by prior moments of its awareness. So where do those come from? Those come from the moments of awareness that existed in the mind of the fetus while it was still in the mother's womb. You can follow that back to the first moment of its conception, and then if there were the moment of awareness that existed at the first moment of conception, also had to be preceded by some other entity of the same kind as the awareness that exists at the moment of conception. And so you've left this life and you've gone to something prior to this life, so that's meant to be probative of the fact that the first moment of this life must have been preceded by some prior element of the mind's continuum. And so that lands you in, requires that there must have been, your mind stream must have had some existence prior to this life. So that's kind of the principal thesis of the Buddhist argument. Then a second argument, which is often used and is often found in literature and was obviously given some weight, certainly in Buddhist times, which that are in modern times, I think, kind of for the typical Westerner, I think it is kind of doesn't carry the same kind of weight that maybe it did prior centuries, and that is the notion of instinct. So the notion of instinct in an animal, for instance. So where does the infant, whether it's a human being as well, but where does the instinct to nurse, for instance, where does that come from? Where does the instinct to engage in certain kinds of behavior that all kinds of animals can exhibit without having learned it? It's not a learned behavior. So if it's an instinctive behavior, that means it's something that is something that has been ingrained in the mind. So if it's been ingrained in the mind, then it must have been some kind of experience, some kind of form of conduct that was engaged in at some time prior to this life. So that's sort of given as evidence for the existence of past life. So that's the second kind of argument, which one sees in literature. A third one is that there's the ability to mentally recall, which we gave 2 examples of. One is some people, have the extraordinary ability, just they're born with it, that they can recall their own past lives. And there was also the ability to develop a level of one-point concentration, which gives a clarity to the mind. Then there are certain exercises that you can engage in which you will then begin to experience your past lives and therefore directly perceive your past lives. So that's the third approach for affirming and verifying the existence of past lives. Which is among the five, he said, that should suffice for me.
단 남자 다원하는데 저 용수 랭가나 주용 공부도 다니 랑게리라 때문에 리니 버시 내지 미스가 자디 이래다 가리리가 담고 저 용수 랭가세요. 지번께만 타대 우주문다. 공부 당화다. 그들의 예과서 최지. 저와 용수 랭가나 랑게리 인정남마다 때문에 이제
Tom said it was like that.
네, 사람새끼도 사람새끼 내태태 따그가 시가 랑게리가 저 용수 사람새끼
Dago do it.
따그가 저는 너가 따그가지 담에 밖에 맡아도 담에 밖에 맡아서 그 사람들과 있게 맡아봤지 하나도 있게 맡아봤지 그러니 안에 우주 제가 우주 제 공부 당왔어 공부 당왔어 이거 공부라서 해야 공부 당와 공부 당와 너희 제발 예반을 줘 너희 제발 예반스다 너희 것이를 그 너희 그 싫어 친구를 기대요 뭐시든 너희 대들로 무슨 지가르스메요 너희 군기 내려도 되는 거라 그냥 제가 그런 거지 러시아가 군기 내려도 돼요 너희 장도 내려 싫은 분 내려 러시아 이런 분들은 소리야 어디서 라는 게 너희 제발 이해받아서 같이 교와 이모스 낸다나 랑게리 내가나말 저가 매받지 많이지 우주 소진이지 우주 소진 라랑이 제가 때마다 우주 계란이 지금 나마 우주 나마 지금 무슨 말이죠 이 우시아게라는 그 가야 돼 이거 지금 나마 지야리 공부 당하지 후에 공부 당하지 이건 소리야 그런데 공부 당하게 그래서 함에 그다음에 샤프리죠 다 때온 언제 또 같이 알바 이 함에 그다음에 그다음에 지난 무심을 당해 당체지야 유통이 당체비까지 이 공부시에 이 야 지금 나만 이시죠 그 이것이 생기는 것이야 이야 이것이 야세 공부 자연 이것이 지리주의 어디에가 그래서 하늘로 예예받았으나 다른
So now the kind of the basic argument for the existence of past lives is presented in verse 35. Gyao Yongsu Lemba Na. Gyao Yongsu Lemba Na means when birth is first taken, literally, then the being who is born, right? The being who is born, then possesses in this verse 3 elements that are exclusive to animate beings, to living beings, to sentient beings. And those 3 qualities, the argument before was talking about mainly about mind, but the argument here, it doesn't limit it to mind. It refers to 3 attributes of a living being. One is breath. They have breath is something that is only possessed by sentient beings. And then the fact that that beings have sense faculties. The faculties are not the physical eyeball, for instance, for the eye, or the physical ear, or the proboscis, the nose, for instance. Rather, the faculties are some capacity, perhaps nerve endings, or it's not even the nerve endings. In Buddhist doctrine, it is referred to as some kind of physical form, but subtle physical form, some kind of clear physical form, some kind of lucid physical form that is unique to living beings, on the basis of which sensory perception can be generated. So the existence of the breath, the existence of the faculties, and the existence of the mind. And then in the commentary, it says when beings are born, there are many different varieties of mind that beings can have. Some beings, based on their past, experience, there's a kind of wisdom that is sort of innate. So some beings that are born are more intelligent, that naturally more intelligent than others. The Buddhist idea is that intelligence comes from the fact that that person cultivated that kind of clarity of mind in the previous life. And so karmically then that manifests itself in future life. A person who fails to do that may have a different kind of intelligence. Mind will not be as quick. So this is one of the reasons why there are different varieties of intelligence among sentient beings. So saying these qualities, in particular, the qualities of the breath, sense faculties, and the mind, are not qualities that arise exclusively from the body. So we think of rebirth as occurring at the moment of conception. Conception takes place when the egg in the mother's womb is fertilized by the male sperm. So when that occurs, then the mind consciousness of the previous life can take seat in that combination of the semen and egg, fertilized egg. And the qualities of the mind, the qualities of the faculties, the qualities of breath do not derive from the semen and the egg. So the idea is there's something about breath which is unique to living beings and is part of what comes when a person takes birth. So there's some capacity to develop breath that is associated with the mind, and the same thing with the faculties. So that's what the argument is suggesting. And it says that these qualities do not occur, and then the last line says the crucial point. They do not occur in a way that is unrelated to entities of the same kind. So the qualities of breath, faculties, and intelligence that are present when a person takes birth are not derived from the body, and they must have a precursor, and that precursor must be some element of breath that came before the breath that you have. The same thing for faculties intelligence. That is tadi tak rangre tak sasana yukiga tedina. So this is meant to be a complete argument.
No,
So, for instance, we assume everyone is familiar with the idea of the intermediate state being. So the intermediate state being is that existence that occurs following the death of one lifetime and prior to the rebirth in the subsequent lifetime. And so that intermediate state being has unique defining qualities. One is that they possess all their faculties intact. Those are things the blind intermediate state being or deaf intermediate state. So that suggests that the intermediate state being is largely a subtle physical body, but it has a physical quality to it that is very closely related to the mind. And so the faculties of that intermediate state being are the precursors of the faculties that you gain when you are reborn in the next life. So there are other sort of explanations that are associated with this idea of living being and living being's faculties and the nature of the breath, for instance. So it's possible, so even though, let's say, the intermediate state being always has its faculties intact, then when a person takes birth, then for a variety of reasons, they can be born blind or they can become blind for some circumstances. When a particular faculty loses its ability to generate that particular form of sense perception, right? Vision, for example. So the faculty is distinct from the eyeball. So the faculty is some sort of luminous quality that is identified as having a state within the eyeball. And then if it's functioning properly, then you're able to see. Even if that faculty is somehow damaged and you no longer are able to generate eye consciousness using it, then the claim is made that the potential for that faculty to be regenerated at some future time, whether it's this lifetime or in another lifetime, remains. So in other words, when a faculty becomes deficient, that doesn't mean that the faculty is vanished and cannot be restored, cannot be regenerated in that being at some point. So if you become blind once, you're blind for the rest of samsara. That doesn't mean that. So, Nube Ngorne is the phrase. Nube Ngorne means still where the faculty is meant to be, the potential for that faculty to become manifest remains, even when the faculty is damaged. That's one point. Okay, that's an interesting observation. The second one is that this verse makes reference to the breath. Then within samsaric existence, there are different levels, right? So in the form realm is the realm beyond the desire realm. We live in the desire realm as human beings. Above the desire realm is the level above it, immediately above it is called the form realm. Form realm has 4 levels associated with 4 levels of meditative concentration, so-called jhana or something. First, second, third jhanas have different attributes to it. As you go up to each subsequent jhana is more subtle, more refined than the previous one, and in particular the 4th jhana, which is the highest of the level of the form realm. If you reach that level, there is no breath. Person no longer, the person's alive, but there is no inhalation or exhalation. But that doesn't mean that quality of the sentient beings is then disappears. So again, the potential to be reborn in another form of existence where breath occurs is still retained by that living being. So these are related points. So there are similar points. So the higher realm than that is called the formless realm. The formless realm generally means there's no physical form. Then there's more explanation about it. So that the Sumekamna so in the formless realm there is no sensory perception. No. So then there's the very well-known ancient term, Namarupa. Right? Namarupa is a word that is meant to describe the constituents of a being. So Nama, it refers name, meaning Tibet, refers to the 4 latter skandhas. The first skandha is Rupa, is physical form. So in the formless realm, there is no Rupa skandha. There's only the 4 so-called name skandhas. So it's essentially a mental state of existence. So then there's a what should I say, a clarification, particularly in Tantra, that mind does not exist independently of any physical quality. So mind is always inseparably combined with some subtle physical aspect, which is referred to as wind, psychic energy. Energy is considered to be physical or not, but at any rate, in Buddhist doctrine, that wind is physical in nature. So in the formless realm, there's no rough physical form, But if there's mind there, then there's subtle physical aspect to the being.
That is not Jordan.
Okay, so this is kind of the groundwork for discussing the Buddhist notion of or arguments for establishing this past lives. So, having given this sort of materials for you that are the basis for the discussion, are there any questions that you have about the points that have been laid out for you? Anybody have the microphone?
This goes back to the earlier discussion before past lives. In terms of the desire to become enlightened because of great compassion or compassion building up, and then looking at how the shivas are, how we get rid of them with compassion, with how the winds or how compassion helps to get rid of the subtle obscurations to omniscience. Are the winds being developed as we, on a much lower level with ordinary compassion, are our winds changing before the path of seeing, and then is there a mental aspect after the path of seeing that drives the desire to become enlightened for the benefit of all beings? I don't know, is that too complicated? Is that clear?
I just want to clarify that you're talking about compassion playing a role in getting rid of subtle obstacle conditions, and part of that process is that compassion refines the winds that we have, and then as we develop to the path of seeing and beyond, the winds take on a quality, a different kind of quality that allows them to remove the.
Or is there? Do we then lose as we go up the boonies? Do we then lose the mental awareness of the desire for enlightenment for the benefit of all beings to the energy of the winds? I mean, do the winds then take that over?
Implying that desire is somehow a mental affliction or what?
No, not a mental affliction. Is the desire for the.
But that's something that should be discarded?
No. Is it something that evolves into the winds, or does it still remain a very, very subtle desire as you go up the winds? And at a lower level, are the winds changing as we're developing low-level compassion?
Okay, I'll do my best to.
What I'm really trying to do is to, for myself, understand the progression of compassion as an energy force for becoming enlightened and how it works.
You're saying that there's a correspondence between compassion and the winds, is that?
Yes, and how does it work to reach enlightenment? How does it work in that way? Or is there any explanation in that way like that?
Did you think 뭔가 직접 샤워도 그래서 람이 거대라 아니 직접으로 기부가 원도 소원스 아니 가서 이렇게 될 때네 아니 가서 무엇을 얘기라 아니 이 저게 전부 저게 저가 준바디 아니 기계고요. 아니 람이 거네 아니 나저 가서 생계래 아니 그냥 가가 사단요래 사바도 아니 이제기 신득이 강대열에 그래서 아니 나는 저기 닝제 some of the merchant bombs the right bomb al ten so we do chagi or that 닝제 the koran bomb al ten ane karsa so that long for sumberwa and 닝제 the bomb al ten 닝제 the compared to draw karsa wangi ane anso ke so can be long so but karsa Jampa so long so yalu so Dila tene, ane lam di karsa you better ya draw to your rest. Hakbar do the generosity or the mortgage someone to carry right. The go at the cheaper rest. That the hakbar do the ane tong ka check tong pick the tom ne ane the karsa the ninja nang gita changchu ninja ki wang ki kebe the ane musem ki Gyumed Darvati Changki Pomdergi Darvati Kurang Karasa Haram Pomne, Haram Pomne, and a Kurang Darvati Kosheta Mindra, that is Kurang Singlet. Darvati Lungi more than the sort of good to go rest, Lungi Sheta. And then Lungi one, then Lungi Nuva, then the Lungi Nuva, so Kan Lam the Tor Then resting.
That now share in a losing the Kulu Koga compared to Lungi Shambati or a Janet Lia, Tina, Jenna, or a dollar share in Lungi.
So, generally, when you talk about the winds, you're addressing something that is mainly discussed in tantric, in context of tantric path, and so of course the winds are one of the basic descriptions of the winds is that they are the mount or the thing upon which the mind rides, right? Mount in that sense, and so you have to refine the winds, and as the winds are refined, then the mind, which is separately combined with the winds, then the mind also is elevated and becomes more refined. So that's something that is kind of unique to Tantra. Then the path, the way the Mahayana path is described in non-tantric doctrine, the idea of winds is kind of never really incorporated. It doesn't really come into play. It's not part of the description of the path system. That's one point. The second point is that I tried to convey the words basically as I could. Use the phrase that said something like the desire to achieve enlightenment dissolve into the winds. You said something like that, right? Those are your words. Well, something along those lines. And the Rinpoche said, well, we would never say that something that's mental in nature would somehow become transformed into something that is physical. Wind is physical. So that's really kind of a fuzzy idea, and that's my word, but that doesn't really seem to be a useful kind of understanding. And he didn't really, what should I say, agree with that sort of description.
That's the idea. Shine community using Shingan Theosia, using Theosia, the beauty of the moon together. The room to chin and beauty Theoch, using better young or Theochi together, or did it beauty and nevis. Moon is Shine Congo Latin city, beauty to never thought. You like have a room together, jet, or a moon but
So one area of discussion that relates to shamatha in particular. Shamatha is a form of one-pointed concentration that is defined by developing qualities. There's a physical aspect, there's a mental aspect that is described by the term Shindan in Tibetan, Sanskrit, prasarabdhi. So there's a physical prasarabdhi and there's a mental prasarabdhi. The physical prasarabdhi, even though prasarabdhi is described as a mental factor, the term physical prasarabdhi is not a mental factor. Physical prasarabdhi, which is a quality that is acquired through one point of concentration, is that when you're meditating one-pointedly, you have kind of in your physical makeup, you have a kind of resistance to one point of concentration. It's part of a physical quality. It's part of your the air, especially the element air element, and so that's due to it's the opposite of prasarabdhi is some kind of yeah, so the opposite of prasarabdhi is something called austulia, which means a so the body's kind of resistant to, it's a negative obstacle to one point of concentration. When we try to concentrate, the mind doesn't respond automatically. There's something within us that's related to the mental affliction. And so we have to sort of refine that, sort of overcome that tendency within the body to fight our one point of concentration. And that's the opposite of prasarabdhi. So when you achieve shamatha, kind of the final traces of that resistance in your body is kind of eliminated. It's almost like it's overcome. When that happens, and there's this great ease that you experience. It's actually a physical quality. And that's one form of prasarabdhi that's associated with the winds. And then that's followed by a mental kind of rapture that is the mental ease that's associated, that's just precedes Yuka. And then the result of having developed that level of proficiency in one point of concentration, and it results in the attainment of Shindan, like the shaman. So one element of the final stage of that process involves overcoming sort of the indisposed wind element in your body. That's something where that's not tantric at all. That's something that is found in the Yogacara literature, particularly in the Abdharma literature, talking about the nature of the mind.
I wanted to ask Rinpoche this. I'm still trying to figure out in my head how to refute the materialist position of body, of mind being dependent on body. And I'm thinking, I wonder if Rinpoche can clarify why mind has to be so different from body, because I'm thinking if they have both such different natures, then how can they interrelate?
In the tantric sense?
No, just like
how can? Oh yes, right. The dualism develops the body.
Yeah, if they're so different, then how can they work together?
Then prasarabdhi, gyauman ching bordilia, pembagil, pembagil, semdi, prasa, lugi, prasarabdhi,
제로이 쉽게 마음에다 마음에 우리
gyumed 와.
마음에다 마음에 우리 이제 제로 대 창다 차이 우리가 그렇게 있다 유지에 아니 장다 뒤에 있다고 유지라는 것이 장 장이
Vale. Sobre the Gyumed
예대들이 창다 창명되는 것인데 이게 장비 위에다 붙여 장비 위에다 이제 뒤에서 아니 마음에다 마음에 위에다 위에
그래서 그래.
장다 뒤집어는 시 이지라 시
간접만 진짜 Jampa look de la, and Shevitz and mess, you're
that is Shabati training here.
Yine Quran,
For that Shabati, duty, that here,
Jatan, Kennedy, Mogity, Robson, Modi, Haguya. Nana, Nanga ina, de la Haka, Pagaguya, the Sananda, Sananda. Shavas and the Quran is the dog in the relativity of your little to your that the Yena, that Ludi called Ludi Nama Kasa, bring down Nama Tenikeva Mato, Ludi Tenikeva Mares, Lu Koran Korang in Yelling Yard, Lobsang good to be on it. That the day in according to the Kaga for the Tago. Then in another Sena, Lud Kasa 70. Lula Karsapa, Yacha to be let Jet to be arrested. Just any crime of Kadaina, send the any Ludan Jawa at a skinny shop.
Send the send the age of a nature. In a send the temper, then the name of the nature. Then the name of the areas. Then chapter is. Then chapter says the will daughter to put same daughter. Then chapter Marie. Then the Kaviari send the internal dance here. Send you use some things. It never temple. Send the temple never.
So the Buddhist position is that there is a relationship between the mind and the body, and it's kind of, in some sense, reciprocal. So our physical body can have an effect on the mind. By the same token, by whatever you want to call it, will or intelligence or conscious effort, you can, the mind can overcome, or the mind can influence the body as well, keep it under control. So Buddhists do not reject outright that there's any relationship between the two. They do have an effect, one upon the other. It's reciprocal. However, the main point is to say that the mind. So here in the verse it says. In the Tibetan it says, "Luni bashik leke." Bashik means exclusively. So the mind does not arise exclusively from the body. So the mind is not dependent upon the body in the sense that if the body is, becomes what's the word? Your physical form, you die, right? Your physical organism breaks down. That means that therefore the mind is similarly affected in such a way that the mind no longer exists. That idea is the real crux of what the Buddhists deny. It's not to say that there's some connection or some relation between the mind and the body when a person takes birth, but it's maintained. This is one way of thinking of it is the mind. By controlling the mind, you can overcome whatever influence the body might have on your mind. Mind is the mind is stronger even than the body, and that's not what Rinpoche said. But part of the discussion is relates to that, particularly overcoming the mental affliction. But so it's not to say there's no relation between them, that they're different entities, but that the mind is not absolutely tied to the body and exists only because of the body. And Rinpoche also made a further point. He said that those three analogies that the materialists give of the relationship with the body are slightly different So in the case of the alcohol and the potential to create intoxication, that's one where the intoxication is an attribute of the body. So the mind is an attribute of the body. The one where the lamp, between the lamp and the light of the lamp, that the force of that analogy, or the meaning of that analogy, is that there's a cause and result relationship. The mind arises from the body, so a result of the physical body. And the third one was between the wall and the drawing on the wall, or painting on a wall. That's to say that the mind is of the same essential nature as the body. So it's not a different substance. So slightly different, I should say, philosophical significance of how the relationship is described in three different ways. He added that, so I wanted to include that. It wasn't necessarily directly addressing the question. Kanini bachi nancho le rest. Deep my bachi.
Yeah.
Okay.
So where I'm still stuck, and maybe I'm thinking back, to the arguments we use for like why the self is not the same as the aggregates, because they have two different natures and they can have no relationship. So, and I'm thinking the same, if the mind is so different in nature from the body, how can they ever have any relationship? Because we're also making the argument that the mind has its own nature, and its nature does not come from the body.
자산다디 가다 물질인지 가려서는 샤바디 샤베란 신이 봤다. 류디 류기란 신이 봤다. 그것도 저하면서 가다 물질서 되고 배나 안에 남아져 쪽에 안에 가르사 담에 주베를 받들라 안에 다디 구멍 안에 록수이나 아니 가르사 구멍 안에 안에 다디 또 그거가 생소를 sea sulfiora tanjone so jaguar tanashi semdi lule loksu rangshi kada imasoro ina ane tanjo ane koni yigi jawati just shaki
that kapkale tendo taneti semse yilut motion significa yela jubala ongula tenga par ongula tinga par tada yilute tineti yilute lule tenati onshi na shi teni ongla shabana ko lule tinga arba ongla shabana arba that is teti taneti yilute lule tenga is that mama machi the tambuti ke the tabati yilu onse the kalsarta yilu te deyarba yilu te da mine karel te kuchma de shegerba tanda tati jawati yare na los de mo thadeba chidam mo thadeba de no ye ta sermi kutu mo thadeba de jawati yare Meta duani buti mutadere. Duati mere tingiari. Or mere teni juarba. Or mere tingiari.
meta meta
Ika kashunami. Kashun yarba. Kashunta gawani buti. Ko mutadere te chita chishu. Jishu yarba. Jishu tere jibuti. Mutadere. Yes, Jishu the tingi yarba. If mutadere ten bayari. Dancing. Today ten mutadere shab. Ani dancing be tagi jawati the muchi shab. These and ten bayari to mutadere ten bayari ten. Humanity yaris
If I understood the discussion, talk about relation between things. So there are many examples of things which are essentially distinct, right? That nevertheless are dependent on one another, or rely upon, or connected. Usually. Fire and smoke, for example. Smoke is a separate entity from the fire. Fire is the cause, smoke is the result. Those two things are essentially distinct, and yet the causal relationship between them maintains or establishes some kind of logical relation, connection between them. You gave the example of a knife and a scabbard. Same thing. Scabbard, or all the thing you put a sword in, sulfur scabbard, right? So those are two distinct objects, but the one can be based upon the other or relying upon the other. So the nature of dependence or reliance on one thing on another does not require that they be one and the same essence. If I understood what he was saying. Then before that, he made a distinction between, he used the phrase yilu. Yilu means kind of a subtle, we have a subtle body, which is kind of sometimes the phrase is a mental body. And that has the elements of wind and mind that are inseparable, one and the same nature. But when we take birth and we have a coarse body, then that coarse body develops the physical organs and sense, and then we have the subtle faculties that generate sensory perception through the rough physical body. So that's a different kind of relationship between body and mind. So the relationship between the subtle wind that is inseparable from the mind at that deeper level of our being, those are indistinguishable. One does not exist without the other. But the coarse physical body, that's not the coarse physical body. So before we're born, we have that subtle being, which has a subtle physical element to it. But then once we take birth as a human, for instance, we have a coarse physical body. Then that mind body that takes seat in our physical substance that develops into our rough physical body. Then that establishes some kind of relationship between that subtle mind-body element and that functions and is able to influence the rough physical body, and vice versa. So maybe that's all.
The illusion, definitive knowledge, is illusion. Only illusion, that means you is to use the humanity, come good, you don't you don't have KLA. You give to real meditation, you did the idea.
So that subtle mind-body complex, or that mental being, is able to exist independently of the body. It survives the body. You can incinerate a person's rough body, but that subtle mental body is not destroyed. On the other hand, sensory perception ordinary sensory perception is not possible without the rough physical body. And so that is lost from, with the death of an ordinary physical being. So there's different levels of relationship between the mind and the body.
I think so.
So maybe we'll end the class. Sangye Shindu Nipe Shubha